Hello, my name is Don Blakely, and I'm a 34-year veteran of search and rescue here in British Columbia. Every day, the unpaid professional SARA volunteers respond to British Columbia's backcountry to save the lives of persons like you and me who may be in trouble in the woods. We've learned that some people believe that some of the subjects that we look for should be charged for the provision of this vital service. To some people, that makes sense. But to those of us who are the professionals providing the service, it does not. Let's spend some time looking into the issue, shall we? Let's begin by being crystal clear. We do not charge for search and rescue. I say again, we do not charge for search and rescue. If you are in trouble, stranded, or injured in the woods, you can call 911 and ask for the police. They have the authority to deploy search and rescue units. If someone is injured, ask for the ambulance. The British Columbia Search and Rescue Association and the search and rescue groups unanimously oppose charging for search and rescue because, 1, there are no demonstrated improvements to operations or infrastructure. 2, such a system will cause increased mortality rates, more complicated operations, and increased pressures and risks for search and rescue volunteers. There is little to no financial benefit to the search and rescue community by charging for search and rescue. There is no evidence whatsoever that a charge for rescue system will increase responsible recreation. So for context, let's consider the situation here in British Columbia. In British Columbia, we do approximately 1,700 search and rescue operations per year, and that number is expected to increase. Note, this number does not include evidence searches for the RCMP, standby calls, specific body recoveries for the coroner's service, or civil emergency responses like fire and floods. Now, this is an average of approximately 5 search and rescue operations for every day of the year. Not surprisingly, the bulk of these operations are concentrated in the summer season, with slightly fewer numbers in the shoulder seasons of the fall and the spring, with the fewest in the winter. We also get a high concentration of operations on weekends. That's when people have time off work and they head into the backcountry for recreation. The more people that are back in the woods, the more people get in trouble and need our help. We also tend to get called at the end of the day. People who are worried about their loved ones will often give them until night starts to fall before they start calling for help. So most of our operations begin and are conducted at night. Also, when there's bad weather or storms and people are fleeing home from them, we will be headed out into the teeth of those storms to rescue people who've become stranded, lost, or injured. British Columbia accounts for more than 50% of all ground SAR operations in Canada. Why so many, you might ask? Is there something wrong with British Columbia? And the answer quite simply is no. We have a terrain and culture that is ideally suited to spectacular backcountry recreation. We have mountains, coastal rainforests, semi-arid deserts, lakes, fertile valleys, and northern muskeg. All of these terrain types suit so many recreation activities, and you can have spectacular experiences. So we have a very strong culture of backcountry recreation here in British Columbia. So a large proportion of our population recreates in the backcountry. The more people you have in the backcountry, the more people there are that will just get into trouble. In 2020, we have 79 search and rescue groups strategically located throughout the province. We also have approximately 2,500 unpaid professional volunteers who make up those search and rescue groups. These volunteers are unpaid professionals, and they come from all walks of life. We have lawyers, accountants, teachers, nurses, seniors, moms, students, mill workers, and self-employed businessmen, and so on and so on. In order to become a search and rescue volunteer, each of these persons must take the most robust and demanding training regime available for search and rescue in Canada. In addition to making a significant commitment of time to training and operations, each volunteer must also commit to administration, governance, maintenance, and fundraising. These are significant pressures upon the volunteers because they also have demands of family and work life. In recent years, we've noticed a significant shift in our operations from the wilderness environment to the urban environment, specifically children, people with autism, and people with dementia. Have a look at this chart. It combines the numbers of operations from the year 1991 to the year 2020. If you look at the left-hand side of the chart, you will see that the number of operations in 1991 was 500. If you look at the extreme right-hand side of the chart, the number of operations was just cracking 1,700. This means that over a 30-year period, the number of operations has more than tripled. This increase in operations largely matches the increase in the size of British Columbia's tourism industry. We don't know that there is an exact correlation, but it's something interesting to note. Note that over that 30-year period, the tripling of operations has also placed significant demand on the volunteers' time. These demands are ramping up significantly. Our current statistical models indicate that by the year 2030, the number of operations will increase to 2,300. So who is it that we are responding to? This table shows the activity types for the years 2018 to 2020. Note the top 5 categories in each of those years. They are fairly consistent from year to year. This chart combines those 3 years, and again, note the top 5 categories. I would like to point out that hunters at the very bottom are barely registering at 1.9%. We'll talk more about that later. Also look at skiing alpine. They too barely register at 3.9%. This includes a much smaller category of out-of-bounds skiers. Seemingly good ideas are sometimes just wrong, so I'm asking you to keep an open mind. It is significant that the search and rescue professionals who know the system oppose charging for rescue. How about some facts? What's at stake in terms of costs? Well, the average cost of a search and rescue operation in British Columbia is $6,500. But in extended operations, complicated operations, or operations which involve extensive use of helicopters, it can be as high as $250,000. By contrast, the federal government, which looks for downed aircraft using helicopters and aircraft, or marine searches, where they also use ships, can spend as much as millions of dollars per operation. There is no charge by the federal government for marine rescue or looking for downed aircraft. And there is no supporting legislation whatsoever in any of Canada's 10 provinces or 3 territories. There is supporting legislation in the United States to charge for rescue, but only in 7 US states, most notably in New Hampshire, which has the most comprehensive system. So we can learn lessons from that. Industry can and do charge for their services. Notably, if you buy a ski lift ticket and end up wandering outside their boundaries and they have to look for you, they can and will charge you. Because in that ticket is a contract which you agree allows them to charge for that service. Also, if you're in trouble in the woods and you flag down a passing helicopter and they assist you, they can and will charge you for that service. Not all activities perceived as high risk are in fact high risk. It's possible to mitigate risk and reduce it to acceptable levels through training, equipment, and good procedures. Let me give an example. We conduct rope rescue operations at night, and to the untrained eye, that might seem to be an extremely high-risk activity. But through these procedures, training, and equipment, it's actually a very safe operation. A policy of not charging for search and rescue is formally supported by the Mountain Rescue Association, which is an international association of search and rescue groups, the American Alpine Club, the British Columbia Search and Rescue Association, the Search and Rescue Volunteer Association of Canada, which represents all SAR volunteers in Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories, the U.S. National Park Service, the U.S. National SAR Plan, which is supported by the U.S. State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Coast Guard. It's also opposed by the National Association for Search and Rescue, which is the organization in the United States that represents all search and rescue volunteers there. The BCSARA Council of Canada, which represents all the emergency measures organizations in Canada, Emergency Management BC, and the AdventureSmart program, which is our national education program for search and rescue. Public and political perception is shaped by the media. The general situation is that we have 5 search and rescue operations each and every day in British Columbia on average. How many might you hear about? 1 every 2 weeks? A couple a month? And what kind of operations do they focus on? Well, in order to satisfy the needs of their audience, and because they're great stories, the media tends to focus on those subjects who have acted irresponsibly. Now, because that's all the public tends to see, they have this misconception that those are the people we often end up looking for the most. And as such, there's a form of moral outrage that's formed, and people say, we should charge for search and rescue. But let's remember, the perception does not match the reality. Quite often, this issue is focused on skiers who go out of bounds, and yet they hardly register in terms of the numbers of operations that we look for. Our statistics show that those who are deliberately irresponsible or engage in high-risk activities cause significantly less than 5% of our operations. Again, it just goes to show the perception does not match the reality. Another fact is that the recidivism rate of people who act irresponsibly is extremely low. Usually when we recover someone in the bush, they learn their lesson. And the result is we never tend to see them again. The numbers of people who actually go out and do it again is almost unheard of. Charging for search and rescue is contrary to the humanitarian origins of search and rescue groups. In the 50s and 60s, many search and rescue groups evolved out of civil defense units. In many other communities, it simply arose as a community response to a person in need. A person went missing, and so the community banded together. Businessmen would act as planners and organizers. Foremen at the mill would act as team leaders. And just the citizens of the community would act as searchers. And they would go out into the woods with no expectation of pay, no expectation that anyone would be charged, and they would go and help these fellow citizens. That same culture is very strong in our current volunteers and in our search and rescue units. If you ask any search and rescue volunteer, almost all of them will tell you they joined to help people. They do not want these people that they help to be charged, nor do these volunteers want to be paid for what they do. The infrastructure costs of the search and rescue service in British Columbia amount to approximately $10 million per year. And what do I mean by infrastructure? I mean the costs of providing training, providing and maintaining equipment, vehicles, and buildings. Most of this funding is provided by the provincial government. The search and rescue groups also have access to community gaming grants. Many of these search and rescue groups are supported by their local municipal governments, but not all. But most significantly, many search and rescue units rely heavily upon the kind, charitable donations coming from the community. This is invaluable support. One of the most important points is that people have a right to recreation. People are entitled and in fact encouraged to take risks to enhance their backcountry experiences. But not all risks. Risks must be well thought out and balanced with safety. When done properly, you can have a spectacular backcountry experience. But we must recognize that despite the best planning, preparation, and organization, things can and will still go wrong. Nature has a way of proving it's the biggest dog on the block. Put simply, things sometimes just happen. And that's who we tend to look for, the people who've been unlucky. I now want to talk about the limits of a charge for rescue regime. Many of these lessons come from the experience in the United States. In Canada, the law limits the government's ability to collect for services only the operational costs. It cannot collect the costs of infrastructure. Some U.S. examples indicate that the cost of the bureaucracy and especially the cost of the collection proceedings actually exceed the cost of the revenues. We also know here in British Columbia from certain instances when government has imposed a tax for a specific purpose, that tax does not necessarily go to that purpose. Sometimes it just goes into general revenue. We also have to account for human nature. The fact is, you cannot legislate good behavior. We have laws against jaywalking, drunk driving, driving without a seatbelt, and even riding a bicycle without a helmet. And yet, we see these things happening despite the passage of those laws. It's fair to say that the passage of a law which charges for search and rescue in an attempt to discourage certain types of activity won't stop that activity. So let's talk about collection issues. If a person who's been billed for a search and rescue service wants to contest that bill in court, he can. What does this mean? It means that the volunteers will have to attend a trial and give evidence. They have to take time off work without pay. So this ends up putting significantly more pressure on the volunteers. We also know from the United States experience, people will tend to countersue in order to try and offset the cost. So they will sue the search and rescue unit. The most common types of things that search and rescue units are sued for is delayed response or inadequate response. So this now means 2 trials with substantial increases on the already significant demands of the volunteers' time. More effort, more expense. We also have to recognize that no matter how good our case is, the fact is we will still lose some cases. More wasted effort, more wasted expense. Finally, as a legal matter, how do you prove blameworthiness? How do you quantify it? Where is the threshold? This is a practical problem because there are degrees of fault in some of these cases. Obviously, there are some where the search and rescue response was triggered by an irresponsible decision. But what about on the other end, where the situation was triggered more by bad luck than it was by a small element of irresponsible decision-making, and everything in between? Where do you draw the line? How do you prove it? These are significant legal issues. Another collection issue is that if you bill a search and rescue subject or their family, are you not in fact further victimizing a search and rescue subject? Is cost recovery a noble objective in that circumstance? We also know that some search and rescue operations can cost as much as $250,000. So we need to recognize that a search and rescue bill in those types of operations could and will bankrupt some families. And I ask again, is cost recovery a noble objective? Even if the government wins the case, they still have to initiate collection proceedings, and that's certainly more effort, more expense. And again, if the government wins the case, we also have to recognize that some people are judgment-proof. What do I mean by that? Some people don't have any money, so you can go through all this effort and expense, win your court case, and they have no money. More wasted effort, more expense. Hopefully, I've made a strong case for showing that charging for search and rescue is not cost-effective. It's certainly not a practical solution. I now want to address a key question, and that is, who do you charge? The majority of persons that we look for are just unlucky persons. Is charging for search and rescue a noble objective or appropriate in that circumstance? What about the person who did not request search and rescue? Who do we charge then? Do we charge the subject? He didn't ask for it. Do we charge the person who called? Maybe it was family or friends. Is it appropriate to charge? And what about the I could have got out myself defense? We certainly see that in our operations. We have circumstances where people have worked their way out of the bush before we've been able to reach them. We've had other circumstances where we have rescued them in the woods, but know that if they had a little more time, they would have gotten out on their own. Is it appropriate to charge them in that circumstance? Is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? We also have circumstances where the call doesn't come from the subject. More often it comes from family, friends, co-workers. Is it appropriate to charge them in those circumstances, even if the person did not require rescue? Now, what about people who were merely overdue? Do we charge them? Should we charge them? They were never in any trouble. What about persons who were found deceased? Do we charge their estate? Do we charge their family? Should we charge them? Is that a noble objective? We have a few operations every year where subjects are never found. Maybe they were swept away in a river. Even if the cause of that incident was an irresponsible decision, do we charge the deceased estate? Do we charge the family? Is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? We also have operations every year where the people aren't actually missing. Their family is worried about them because they don't know where they are. They think they might be in trouble, and so they call search and rescue. But in fact, sometimes they were just in the pub, or sometimes they're at the girlfriend's house. They didn't just tell anybody. Is charging appropriate in that circumstances? Is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? What about those operations where the incident was caused in a small part by irresponsible decision-making, but the major causal factor was just being unlucky? Is it appropriate to charge for search and rescue in that circumstance? Is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? Finally, what about people who face certain challenges that might cause them to make poor decisions? Sometimes we look for children, people with autism, people with dementia. Because of those challenges, they often do things they might not have done otherwise. Is that a situation where we should be charging for search and rescue? Is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? Let's now look at the political impacts of a charge for rescue regime. We know from the United States examples that there are increased expectations that might not match the capabilities of the search and rescue groups. There is increased scrutiny. That's not a bad thing. But there's also greater liability. That is a bad thing. In Canada, on a philosophical basis, there is a social contract between Canada's citizens and its government. In return for surrendering some of its freedoms, citizens can and should expect the government to provide safety nets. Canada's constitution includes the British North America Act, and that act requires the federal government to provide peace, order, and good government. Part of peace, order, and good government are adequate safety nets. Search and rescue is one of those safety nets. Courts have repeatedly held that the government owes a duty to its citizens to protect them from reasonable harm. Search and rescue is one of those safety nets that the government can and should provide. Charging for search and rescue erodes the free public services doctrine. You might wonder what that is. It's a principle of Canadian society and most societies. What it means is that when citizens pay taxes to the government will provide certain services for free. For example, we do not charge people when the police respond to a report of crime. We do not charge people when the fire department responds to put the fire out in your house. Likewise, there should be no charge for search and rescue assisting people who are in trouble in the backcountry. Another political impact is a horrific scenario that search and rescue volunteers want to avoid at all costs. Picture in the theater of your mind a mother appearing on TV. She's devastated. She's on social assistance, and she's waiving a bill that was rendered by the government for recovering her deceased son, who made an irresponsible decision. Can you imagine the consequences on the search and rescue unit for that kind of scenario? Search and rescue volunteers want to avoid that at all costs. Another political impact is the effect on the ability of search and rescue groups to receive charitable donations. If the public is under the mistaken impression that the charge for rescue system fully funds the search and rescue service, it's extremely difficult for the search and rescue groups to compete for charitable donations. Another political impact that we know from the United States experience is that there is an increased willingness to sue search and rescue groups. We also know that a charge for rescue regime will impact our ability to retain and recruit volunteers. Many of our existing volunteers will tell you that if a charge for rescue regime is implemented, they will quit. That's not why they are part of search and rescue. They are there to help people. Another political impact is that charging for search and rescue is contrary to the symbolism and spirit of Canada's unique outdoor culture. We have a rich outdoor culture here, and charging for search and rescue will only discourage that from happening. Let's get real for a moment. Let's recognize that a charge for rescue proposal is a pressure to punish philosophy disguised as a user pay model. The charge for rescue idea is often triggered by news stories which show persons making irresponsible decisions that require the response of a search and rescue group. It's this moral outrage that creates the desire to charge for search and rescue. So let's recognize this for what it is. It's a pressure to punish philosophy. It's important to recognize that it's bad policy to govern by exception. Now, what do I mean by that? We create laws in our society for the general application to the population. But when you start focusing on narrow exceptions, you can create rules or regulations that have unintended consequences. By trying to capture this very small percentage of people who act irresponsibly, you apply a charge for rescue regime to many more people where it's not appropriate. Another way of putting it is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I now want to talk about the operational impacts that result from a charge for rescue regime. We know this not only from US examples, but even from our experiences even here in Canada. So even though we do not have a charge for rescue regime, sometimes people half hear a news story or only see the title of a newspaper article and they think that there's charge for rescue here, even when there isn't. And that has impacts for us. The first impact is that people will delay in calling us for search and rescue in order to avoid a bill. We know from our statistical data that a delay of 24 hours reduces the subject's probability of survival by 50%. 2 days delay means that we have only a 25% chance of recovering them alive. This is a significant impact. Also consider that search and rescue operations occur during deteriorating weather conditions. This reduces the subject's probability of survival by even more. So delay creates a more acute problem in terms of probability of survival. A second impact that we tend to see in operations is that subjects will actually hide from us or even run away when the search teams see them. All of this in an effort to avoid receiving a search and rescue bill, even though we don't have a charge for rescue system in British Columbia. Also, very significantly, rather than calling on search and rescue, family, friends, and co-workers will venture into the backcountry on their own in an attempt to locate and rescue their loved one. This creates huge problems for us. First, not only do they contaminate the search area by trampling all the clues, but they also get lost or injured themselves, thereby greatly complicating our operations and stretching our already scarce resources. So I ask again, is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? We've also had circumstances where subjects themselves or the witnesses will refuse to provide us with essential information. This causes more delay, reduces the probability of survival. We also have circumstances where families fight to turn us away from the area. We work for the police, and we will, of course, complete the operation. But this is a serious consequence if the family is not only refusing to assist us, but actually opposing us. We also know that a charge for rescue proposal causes us increased fatalities from unwise attempts at self-rescue. Subjects who are in need of real rescue, rather than calling us, will attempt to get out of the situation themselves. The consequence of that is that they are often injured or even killed when we could have rescued them safely. So I ask again, is charging for search and rescue a noble objective? In conclusion, I would like to say, first of all, there are no demonstrated improvements to operations or infrastructure. Secondly, we know that the system will cause increased mortality rates, more complicated operations, increased pressures and risks for volunteers. Thirdly, there is little or no financial benefit to the search and rescue service. Lastly, we can see that there is no evidence whatsoever that a charge for rescue system will increase responsible recreation. As you can see, a charge for rescue regime has only negatives, no real positives. If you want to know more about this issue, go to the link that's on your screen. This leaves open the real question of what should we do to reduce the number and severity of search and rescue incidents? This is an area we call preventative search and rescue. At the local level, search and rescue groups are marking trails in confusing spots, attending trade shows to educate the public, educating user groups such as snowmobile clubs or hiking clubs. We do know that effective education is one of the big keys. I think a spectacular example that we can point to is the CORE program run by the British Columbia Wildlife Federation. CORE stands for Conservation and Outdoor Recreation Education Program. In the 80s and 90s, hunters were the single largest category of persons that we would look for in the woods. As a result, the British Columbia Wildlife Federation beefed up their survival section in their education program. This is an education program that is mandatory for all hunters. But more importantly, they developed comprehensive materials on planning and organizing a safe hunt. So we have seen that education, combined with advances in technology, has had a huge impact to the point where, and you'll recall this from early on in the presentation, hunters now barely register at 1.9%. Another example of effective education is in the snowmobile community. In the 90s, they too were a huge problem with many avalanche deaths. So search and rescue worked in coordination with industry, local user groups, and clubs in order to try and address the problem. Avalanche Canada was largely responsible for taking the lead, along with local snowmobile clubs, in developing sophisticated education and information campaigns. Again, education combined with advances in technology started to make a difference. It's important to note, though, that you can create technology, but you still have to convince people to buy it and use it. We educated spouses as well as sledders. And you can imagine, over the next number of years, transceivers, shovels, probes started appearing in many a sledder's birthday gift and Christmas gift packages. The result is a huge culture shift. It's social engineering at its best, to the point where sledders are now responsible for only a small part of our operations. In the search and rescue community, we've created our own program called AdventureSmart. It's a national program originally designed and delivered in British Columbia in the 1990s, and it has 5 core principles. The first is outdoor education. That's where we provide public education and train ambassadors to go out into the community. The next principle is community outreach, where these ambassadors attend special events like trailheads or trade shows, and they also collaborate with industry. Third principle, program delivery. So they do presentations of specified curriculum to educate adults, children, specific user groups. They deliver these in workplaces, outdoor clubs, and schools. The fourth principle is working with industry leaders in outdoor safety in order to ensure that there is consistent messaging across multiple platforms, providing training and content creation. Lastly, and this is not just the last principle, but also the ultimate objective, and that is incident prevention. This provides direct support to the British Columbia Search and Rescue volunteers by attempting to limit or reduce the number of operations, or at least reduce the severity of the incidents themselves. For more information on these issues, go to the link shown on your screen. If you want to make a difference, get informed before you go outdoors. I would now like to introduce my friend Sandra, who's going to talk to you more about AdventureSmart.
AdventureSmart is a national organization that was created 17 years ago by the BC Search and Rescue Association. The whole focus behind the program is to engage, educate, and inform outdoor enthusiasts about outdoor safety, with the primary goal of reducing the number and severity of search and rescue calls in the province of BC. AdventureSmart is a national program. Nationally, it's supported by the Search and Rescue Volunteers Association of Canada, and in British Columbia by the BC Search and Rescue Association. The primary message, no matter where you are in the country, is to follow the 3 T's. We want you to trip plan, train, and take essentials. Every time you head outdoors, if you could follow the 3 T's, you'll be more informed, make healthy decisions, and be educated and safe for your outdoor activities. AdventureSmart has some great programming for you if you like to spend time outdoors. We have children's programs, adults programs, all ages, all activities, and you can book them at adventuresmart.ca. The children's program is Hug a Tree and Survive. It talks to kids kindergarten to grade 6 about being safe outdoors, and if something does go wrong and they do get separated from their family or their group, how they can be found safely and brought back home safe. We have adult versions of that program too. It's called Survive Outside. That program mainly focuses on our 3 T's, trip planning, training, and taking the essentials, and then adding season and sport-specific gear if you choose to snowshoe, hike, backcountry ski, split board, snowmobile. That program really focuses on the 3 T's. We have a winter-specific program as well, snow safety education for the backcountry, also for inbounds if you choose to ski at a downhill ski area. This program covers inbound safety and hazards, backcountry awareness, abilities, special gear that you should take with you, special training like avalanche skills training, and how that all applies to your planning and your adventures so that you come home safe and sound. In the summertime, we have the Paddle Smart program. Great, helpful information about being safe on the water in a canoe, in a kayak, inland waters, or coastal. And again, we follow the 3 T's there. Also, we have a Survive Outside snowmobile program, focusing on backcountry snowmobiling, safety in the outdoors, avalanche awareness, and snow safety. All of AdventureSmart's outdoor education is here for you. You can book it free of charge at adventuresmart.ca if it's the children's program, the Hug a Tree and Survive program for K-6, or if it's the snow safety education program for backcountry winter enthusiasts. We have what you need to be safe outdoors and to help you be prepared and not scared. Book everything at adventuresmart.ca. In addition to our outdoor education for the public, we have volunteer opportunities as well. We deliver outdoor educator training workshops for those of you who would like to join us as a volunteer. This allows you to learn more about the programming, the outdoor education, and how you can share this consistent message in your community. This helps your local search and rescue groups, it helps your community of outdoor enthusiasts, and it helps the AdventureSmart program spread this message even farther, so it helps us provincially and nationally. To learn more about these outdoor educator training workshops, visit BC AdventureSmart on the BC AdventureSmart Facebook events page. Also, the events are listed at adventuresmart.ca. We also do face-to-face outreach, and we do that with outreach crews. We situate them in the province based on search and rescue call volume. So in the summertime, we know that the Sea to Sky corridor is a very busy region for search and rescue calls for hikers. Our outreach crews will educate, engage, informing them specifically about what they need to do to be safe outdoors for their hiking adventure. And that's to make a plan, file a plan, have the proper training for that hiking adventure, and taking the essentials with them and adding anything that would be season and sport specific for hiking. And we also do this in the wintertime. We'll place our outreach crews in areas that are busy in the wintertime for the user groups that cause the most search and rescue incidents. For that, it's snowmobilers and then skiers. We can target these 2 seasons with our outreach crews, and it's a very effective way to educate the public. We have our public education, we have our volunteer groups, we have our outreach, and we have a lot of engagement on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where we have daily conversations with outdoor enthusiasts. We have campaigns that come up seasonally, but also weekly. One great example is every Tuesday is Trip Plan Tuesday. We talk about the importance of making a plan and the finer details of making that plan. And then we also talk about how you can leave that plan at home with friends or family. We can help you make your plans. We have an app for that, the AdventureSmart Trip Plan app, that allows you to fill in all the fields as you make your plan, leave all the important information with your trusted emergency contact, and then if anything does happen, your emergency contact has all of that information to give to the local police or RCMP, and they will transfer it to the local search and rescue group that's been tasked out. The app is easy, the app is free, and it helps you plan for every adventure, no matter if it's a big adventure or a small adventure. AdventureSmart.ca for the Trip Plan app. No matter how big or small your adventure is, you need to make a plan. Planning is essential for every adventure. For a small group, a large group, a big adventure, or a small adventure, you need to make a plan every time. The plan consists of planning your travel route, your navigation, checking the weather, the finer details of the weather, sunset, precipitation amounts, your abilities to navigate in this terrain, and understanding the elements. Those are just a few components of making a plan. The first T of our 3 T's, trip plan, consists of making that plan. The second component of trip planning is to leave that plan with a trusted emergency contact. You can use the AdventureSmart app for that, the Trip Plan app, and that allows you to leave all that detailed information with an emergency trusted contact in case something goes wrong. Then they can use all that information and give it to police or RCMP. Then it will be handed over to the local search and rescue group. So the effort that you take to plan your adventure a day before, 2 days before, a week, 2 weeks before your adventure will make a difference in your outing. It will make it safer, easier to follow, and if something does go wrong, all of that information gets transferred over to search and rescue, and they'll find you faster by using all of that information. Trip planning, make a plan, leave a plan with your emergency contact, and help your local search and rescue volunteers. To learn more about our outdoor education, you can follow us at BC AdventureSmart, and you can join us for one of our weekly webinars where we talk about our programs, we talk about your safety and how you can plan, how you can have the right training and carry the right gear. These weekly webinars are free of charge at BC AdventureSmart. They're easily accessible, and they'll help you follow the 3 T's. You'll learn more about trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. We also talk about what to do in an emergency and how important it is to stop. We need you to stop, think, observe, plan, then act. So we talk about what you should do in an emergency. We also share information about no charge for rescue. Our BC AdventureSmart webinars is a great spot to start if you're heading outdoors in the future. AdventureSmart.ca and BC AdventureSmart has a wealth of information for you to learn more and be prepared.
If you need search and rescue, call 911 and ask for the police. If someone is injured, ask for the ambulance. But above all, remember, we do not charge for search and rescue.
No charge for search and rescue!